are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me today, as always, it's the one, the only, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. You know, it's another day in paradise here in the You Would Think offices. It's been 2 weeks since our last show, and there's not a ton of news.
It feels weird it's been 2 weeks. It feels like it's been a long time.
Having last Sunday off was weird. But, you know, there's not a ton of news, but we will get into that news. So, you know, let's get straight to it, not really bury the lead. Biggest story is probably Nolan Patrick signing his qualifying offer, correct?
It's one of two. I mean, there's pretty much, it's one of the top two, so we can definitely start with that. It's a good idea to really kind of hit on that and talk about. I mean, it's not really that complex of a deal.
No.
I mean, because it's just a qualifying offer, it's not complex in any way. It's 1 year, which is the standard for qualifying offers. He didn't get too much of a raise either, which kind of surprised me. I kind of thought that even for a qualifying offer, I thought he was going to be pushing much closer to 1 million exactly, or maybe, you know, around that mark, because he has 2 years of NHL experience. He has some numbers in those years too. Like, it's not like he had no production in those years.
Right.
So I was a little surprised that he didn't, maybe not that he didn't like the qualifying offer looks this way, but it's that he didn't decline it, push for something like 1 year, 1 mil, you know, just to have that 7-figure digit. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's hard for Nolan Patrick to push for anything at this point, just because he hasn't touched ice in, you know, a long time at this point.
Well, I do think he had no leverage. I will agree with that. He has absolutely no
zero
leverage in negotiations.
You know, right. And this basically serves as a 1 year extension of his ELC.
Pretty much. And, you know, here's the thing.
He might have lost out on some bonuses.
Possibly. I mean, it's really, really hard to talk about his contract in this year in particular, because we don't know a lot about when it's going to happen.
Right.
I've watched over the days since this happened. I've watched Twitter go back and forth, and it seems like it's one or the other extreme. It's either he's going to be the cheapest and best 3C in the league, or he's not going to play at all. Well, and there is no in between.
I'm not sure that there should be an in between, because I think if Nolan Patrick's healthy enough to play, it's not a knee where it might bother him, or a groin where it might affect his skating a little bit. Either he's cleared to play or he's not. And if he's cleared to play, he's probably a 3C. And probably one of the better, more underpaid 3Cs in the league. If he's not cleared to play, then he's a bum on the bench, you know?
I just wonder, and this is where I'll take the 3C conversation. I just wonder if he's going to be returned to any form of close to that level of production he was having as a rookie or in his second year. And I'm not saying it was great production for a second overall pick. I know there's a lot left to be desired with this player. Right. There's a lot left to be desired when he was a number 2. Felt like a consensus number 1.
We'll talk about more disappointing top 10 picks later on in the show.
Oh,
Flyers made more signings.
Well, that one happened a while ago. We just didn't even bother to mention it. But that's the thing. Like, are people pinning too high expectations on him by trying to call him, he'll be the best and cheapest 3C in the league, like, or I guess best value for the money is what they're trying to say. Like, in terms of he's less than $1 million. If he does play, he's probably going to slide into the 3C position. And then what do you do? Like, what kind of production is he going to get you from there that would make him that valuable and that effective? And I don't disagree that if he gives you near the same goal total, right? Like, if he gave you 15 goals in a full season, being it's his third year, and he would be playing a more sheltered role as a 3C, because there were times he was playing 2C because they didn't have a 2C.
Right. And so I think that's a lot of the reason they went out and signed Kevin Hayes.
Well, it's definitely a big reason they signed Kevin Hayes. They knew they needed somebody else to at least shelter him. I think they did that before they even knew about the problems.
Okay. I think it's close, but yeah.
Well, because I think you're signing a guy at that point in time who you know is in his prime years, because Kevin Hayes is 28 and
you don't sign him to 7 years as a
well, and he's 28 now. By the way, he's 28 now. He wasn't 28 when he signed the contract. So yes, it's like, you sign him at 27, you give him 7 years, you figure you're going to lock him up until he's 33, 34. And
that's not a stopgap signing.
You're here for the long haul.
That's a franchise cornerstone type signing. Right.
But that was also, I think, a way to just be able to add more insurance to the position in general. You didn't know. I don't think you knew a lot about who your fourth center was going to be. I mean, let's put it this way: at this time last year, or maybe not this time because a little earlier than that, we were talking about Scott Lawton playing 4C.
It's crazy
And
how
that
far
changed.
Scott Lawton's come in
And
12 months.
and that changed not because of how well he played per se. It actually changed because of the way he was used by Alain Vigneault.
Yeah, he went to the wing.
Alain Vigneault liked him as a winger, and now all of a sudden he's a third liner because he's definitely better among the wingers at that point.
And was on the second line a little bit.
And then pushed to the second line toward the end of it. Exactly. So it depends on usage. I don't know that, and things like that. I mean, I just don't like the expectations that surround him one way or the other too, by the way. Like, I don't like the expectations for Nolan Patrick being that he's going to be the most valuable 3C in the league because he's making less than $1 million. I don't think that that's realistic because let's face it. We keep talking about this. We mentioned this in a previous show. I don't remember if it was the last one we did or a couple weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, but we talked about him and said, if it goes long enough, and it's not his fault if this happens, but the longer that this gap between the end of this season and next season goes,
that's just more time off the ice.
But what is the possibility that, let's this way, we know the target date is January, but there's nothing firm about that. What if it gets to April? And what if it becomes 2 full years where he's not on the ice? Time's running out for people to take his career seriously at that point. And so that's where I get the extreme of the other side. He's been off the ice for nearly 2 years. How is he going to look? I mean,
I think that side is he going to come back at all? To it. Yeah.
But I don't think it's fair to also give up on the kid's career when he's 21, 22 years old.
Absolutely.
It's why they won't trade him. It's why they are going to sign this contract and basically take another flyer for a year.
Right. And again, it's like I said, it's not something that's likely to be a hindrance on the ice. Like once it's solved, it's more than likely for the most part resolved.
Yeah, and you hope. I mean, it's nothing to mess around with, obviously, and it could always linger, but I think that.
But generally speaking, these are professional athletes receiving world-class attention. Once they get it under control, I have to imagine they'll be able to manage it.
He's just got to be able to figure something out with this and kind of make a decision for himself. And I know that the decision in his own mind right now is, this is what I want to do. I'm only 2 years into this. I just lost a full year. I'm determined to get back. I mean, let's put it this way. If he gets back and does get that chance to prove himself and has a really good year, maybe it turns into an outstanding year.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's not out of the realm of possibilities. Anything's possible. I mean, he is taking regular scrimmages in Canada right now.
Right.
And that's a positive sign. You can't say anything different about it. It's positive. He's on the ice. He's doing something.
He's playing
It's not competitive, like to that level. It's not a competitive something.
But it's a competitive environment.
But it's a competitive environment. Yep. You're playing with other people. It's good to do that. And that's about all. Let's do it this way. I would be happy if Ivan Provorov was playing like that right now, which he might be for all I know. But
listen, he cannot play in those games because he's too busy just doing power laps on the ice, and he's wearing a hole around the rink in Russia. Like he's, come on.
But you get the point. It's, if anybody's doing that, then I'm excited about it, because right now there's so much uncertainty that if you're getting out there anywhere, good for you. So I will take it no matter what. But it's the matter of that until we get, realistically for me, until we get a date for training camp and then can get an answer, I'm not going to sit here and try to play that game of, well, he could be the best 3C for the value in the league, or he could be the biggest draft bust we've ever seen because he's never going to play again.
And let's be honest,
I'm not going to take that until we actually know that he's missing more time.
And let's be honest,
for sure.
Even when the season does start, he still hasn't been on the ice in 18, 19, 20 months playing, real impactful hockey games.
Mm-hmm.
He's very unlikely, if he's going to be, the quote unquote best, most undervalued 3C in the league, blah, blah, blah. It probably won't be the first 20 games. And I know how this fan base is. And if he goes, if he has 1 goal and 3 assists after 20 games and people are, asking where the production is, relax. I'm already just laying the groundwork for this. Just when he comes back and when he's a little disappointing for the first 15, 20 games, relax.
Yeah. I mean,
he's still a very talented player. He still went second overall a couple of years ago. And assuming he comes back and assuming his NHL career resumes,
mm-hmm.
I have no reason to believe it will not resume the upward trajectory that we saw before he was sidelined.
And I know that
it was really starting to swell a little bit right before he before he went out.
I didn't think his second year was terrible. I think he had
No.
spurts, obviously, which is a big part of his problem so far as a pro is you can't go
A little
that silent.
yeah.
Well, because he can't go that silent for that long from a point production standpoint. Because quite honestly, he looks like a type of forward sometimes, and I'm not saying he doesn't have two-way ability, but he looks like the type of forward in the early going, at least, that if he's not putting up points, he doesn't really show up in any way, shape, or form. Like, and I'm not trying to say that he doesn't show up to play. It's that he's not
as
a
little disheartened.
He's not as noticeable.
Okay.
And if he's not as noticeable, especially if you were relying on him to be a top 6 guy in those first 2 years, because that was before Kevin Hayes and before Lane.
Those were the dark years, man. Andrew McDonald, top line defenseman.
But here's a thought too. I'd love to see Alain Vigneault get his hands on him for real, to know he's available and say, I can do with you whatever I want to in this lineup. And here's what I think would work best for you. I mean, Alain Vigneault's got some not information, but he's got some insight to what he has to do with players as they get older too. Like he had that comment about Claude Giroux and how he's got to condition himself differently and things like that because he's older. It's not going to come as easily from a physical standpoint because you're older. It's not that easy anymore.
Your body doesn't recover like it does, right?
And here's the thing. I read something not long ago. I believe it was something along the lines that had to do with Alex Ovechkin and Barry Trotz. And Barry Trotz had to do the same thing with Ovechkin. You're getting older. It's going to be harder than it's ever been before. And you're going to have to train totally differently than you ever have before. You're going to have to train this way, but you're going to have to train this way. You're going to have to eat this way. You're going to have to do all these things differently now if you want to keep your career going the way it is, because otherwise that opportunity is going to fade away and it's never going to happen. And he's going to have, Alain Vigneault's got to do the same thing right now with Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek and James Van Riemsdyk and tell these guys and help provide that insight that this is what happens as you get into that age range where you're not over the hump yet. You're not over the curve yet but you're on the back nine and everybody knows it. This is what you have to do.
How many guys have we seen hit that wall at 30, 31, 32, where all of a sudden they don't have that same step ahead everybody else they had 3 or 4 years ago. They're getting a little older and they don't take care of themselves and boom, their career just falls out the bottom.
Well, and to me, there's a reason why when the bubble happened this year, that there was, I believe, only 2 players over 40 who were in the bubble among 24 teams. There's a reason why that happens that way.
Wait, let me guess. Was this Zdeno, Chara, and Henrik?
Chara was one. And no, Lundqvist isn't even 40 yet.
Oh, is he not? Wow.
No, he's not. I think it was. Oh my goodness, I had it down.
It wouldn't surprise me if he was.
It might have been like Ron Hainsey or something like that.
Ron Hainsey. That makes a lot of sense.
Somebody like that, or I forget, but it was like somebody like that.
Mark Giordano might be 40 for all we know.
Oh no, I know who it was. It was Marlowe.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So they were both in the East too. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and speaking about, I mean, we'll talk about Patrick Marleau maybe a little later on, but
we'll talk
in San
about
Jose, so that's kind of interesting.
Whoa, Patrick Marleau signing with San Jose. What a surprise that is.
That's the easy one to take off the list then, because the other ones that we wrote, like that I wrote down anyway, that were bigger, there are at least two to three major surprises in there.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll
places
get into
where people went that we went, wow, did anybody see that coming? I mean, one of them happened on the same day Nolan Patrick signed his qualifying offer, by the way.
I was about to say,
within hours.
Let's wrap up Nolan Patrick. Anything else you need to say to put
not really. Like I said, I do want to see Alain Vigneault get his hands on him a little bit and actually be able to work with him in that way and see what he can do from that standpoint. I know that they want to shelter him in that role, which I think could help him a lot from a production standpoint. But
it could help him a lot.
But see, this is why I'm saying that too, because it's less of a demanding position. Lower in the lineup you go, it's less demanding defensively, so you can maybe look like a better two-way player, build some confidence in that area, because you don't have to play the best.
About to say,
no one's going to tell him be Sean Couturier and play the best, and no one's even going to tell him be Kevin Hayes and play the second best.
Yeah,
be the guy who plays the other team's third line.
Yep.
And instead, let's just in the Islander series, not that everybody looked great in the Islander series. We know this, right? But it's Sean Couturier gets Matt Barzal. And instead of giving Nolan Patrick, I'm trying to think about who the next in line is. Instead of giving Nolan Patrick, JG Pajot, Nolan Patrick gets Derek Brassard.
Right. That's a huge
something
step
like that.
Him,
and,
right.
if Brassard was playing center, obviously, but I think because he was playing wing at times too.
And
or Nolan Patrick gets Casey Cizikas,
right.
You have to go somewhere down the line where he gets the better defensive matchup, because you're not asking him to cover Barzal. You're not asking him to cover Pajot or Anders Lee. You're asking him to cover the third guy in line.
Right. And
because
honestly,
it's going to be less demanding than the top guy.
And I think the team is just so much more talented than it was a couple of years ago when he was playing 2C, that he might have better wingers on the third line this year
Sure.
than he had on the second line 2 years ago. Right? He might end up playing with, James Van Riemsdyk on one side and, Scott Lawton on the other.
I would love to see Nick Aube-Kubel on his wing,
or even Nick Aube-Kubel, yeah.
Because here's the thing about that too. Now let's take that dynamic. Let's take that dynamic for a minute. If you put Nick Aube-Kubel, who is one of the best forechecking forwards on this team, bar none, imagine the work he's able to do
to clear space for Nolan Patrick.
To help clear space or help Nolan Patrick, or at that point in time, maybe people key on Nolan Patrick, and then Aube-Kubel's winning battles because he's left one-on-one.
Off each other very well.
That could be a partnership
as an electric
great.
Third line. Yeah. And then who would you want riding shotgun with him? Who do you want in that third seat?
You know what?
I personally,
I know why you say Van Riemsdyk. I know why.
I don't think he's going to slip this far down the lineup, but I'd love to see Joel Farabee as the third.
That's what I was thinking.
Line.
That's exactly who I was thinking. I was thinking that too, because imagine if you put it, and the only thing that I don't like about that line at this given moment is that I think that somewhere along that grouping, and granted, I don't think Van Riemsdyk's necessarily the right guy for it, but I think that they need an older guy.
Okay, well, how about this? You take those three, stick James Van Riemsdyk with them on power play 2.
Oh, that would be pretty interesting.
And then whoever your defenseman is, whoever's not on the top pair, we'll get to our other defenseman in a minute.
I'd have to go through the first power play before I knew the second one for sure.
I imagine your first power play is
like,
going to be Giroux, Couturier,
Voracek, and Konechny, probably.
Konechny, yeah.
The only thing I'm going to disagree with about that second power play then is I doubt they'll go 4 forwards. Because a lot of times you go 3 forwards and 2 defensemen because it's run at the end of the power play.
I don't know, man. You're starting to get to the point where you have enough talent that you might just still want to push 4 forwards here.
It's gonna be interesting one way or the other, but I do see where you're coming from with it, and I don't doubt like Aube-Kubel to me is a really good 2-way forward. Like he knows how to play both ends of the ice. He knows how to go after the puck. He's got a nose for it. Like I think that that's all well and good, and we were told that Nolan Patrick's got some of that ability as well. Like Nolan Patrick has 2-way ability.
Right.
We weren't really, and honestly, in the beginning, that was what his rookie year, hold for the moment where he had an injury, but he played 70 games that year. And for the most part, we were kind of enjoying the fact that he wasn't getting completely beat up defensively more than it was, oh, well, he's not as productive as you'd like for a rookie. I think everybody kind of saw his numbers in juniors and went, oh, here comes the Calder winner.
Right.
And obviously that didn't happen. And guess what? Neither did the guy who went first overall that year, who entered the league right away either. No. Like the Calder that year went to a guy who was an established not veteran, but like who was an established prospect in his team system. Like he was around for a little while. It wasn't like it was the same year. And we came out of that with Heischer, Patrick, and Elias Pettersson. It wasn't that at all. It was going to be guys who were down the line in development. They've been around for a little while. They've been around the block for development camps and NHL training and NHL facilities. They knew what to expect going in. So that's how they made their team and got either that or maybe they didn't make their team, or maybe they didn't even make their team that year per se. Like they were already there from the year before, like played 10 games and you go, you're not a rookie. You just got to call up. You got to taste. Like, does Cale Makar look as good as a Calder finalist if he didn't get the playoff experience the year before? Like that playoff experience helps.
Maybe.
Well, no, but it helps.
I get what you're saying.
It gives him a slight edge. I mean, not a huge one because I think Quinn Hughes even got a taste at some point. But like, it gives you an edge. You played in some pretty significant games, and not only did you play in significant games, you had success. He did go out and score a goal. He did go out and score a goal. It wasn't like he showed up and it was, well, you're going to play on the third pairing and you're going to play 10 minutes a night. And we're just letting you feel it out.
Right.
No, they pretty much threw him into it, which is a pretty big step for a kid who's getting into his first games in the playoffs.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know they're a talented team. I remember when it happened. So no, I do want to talk about one more signing the Flyers made that is likely to affect the starting lineup, right? They made a couple other little minor deals, and I joked about Derek Pouliot earlier, and we're looking around here, but they did make one more move since our last show that is likely to affect the actual starting lineup, and that would be the signing of Erik Gustafson to a 1-year $3 million contract. A lot of people were upset about this. Kevin, what do you think about it?
Okay, I'll get into this in a minute. First of all, what day did this happen?
The
Monday
Monday
after
after the
the
last show, I believe.
Yeah, right. Like again, like as perfect as it could be. That news drop that happens on the Monday after,
Always,
right?
always, always, always.
All right. So
Gustafson,
here's
1 year, $3 million. What do you think?
all right. I don't hate the contract because
You
it's one
can.
because it's 1 year. I don't hate it. Um, the style of player is questionable to an extent
Yeah.
because and in fairness to Chuck Fletcher and in fairness to what the Flyers are trying to do right now, I don't disagree with what he said, where there's not really a replacement for Matt Niskanen out there, unless you were going to sign Alex Pietrangelo.
Right. The Flyers were in a really tough spot with Matt Niskanen kind of pulling the rug out from under them and saying, oh, by the way, now you need a top 2 defenseman.
Right. By the way, because I saw some comments when I posted the stories or whatever about it and stuff like that, and went, well, Niskanen gave them no time to be able to work with free agents and do negotiations. That's not true in the slightest. And I'll tell you why. First of all, there was no pre-tampering period. There was no time leading up to it. Everybody started at the same time. They still had a week to try to figure it out. That's one. Two, Niskanen called Chuck Fletcher the day after the Flyers got eliminated from the playoffs. That was Labor Day weekend. Calls Chuck Fletcher and says, I'm thinking about doing this. And Chuck Fletcher says, think about it.
Yeah.
Go home,
maybe
see
we
your
didn't
family.
make that clear enough on the last show.
Right. No, but go home, think about it.
Right.
I know it wasn't even comments to our show. Like, that's the thing.
No,
like,
I know.
But
just
still,
in general,
nonetheless. But yes, it's so go home, think about it. And probably within a few weeks, that's when he calls them and says, yes, I'm thinking about this still. And this is what I'm going to do. And he's texted all of his teammates about it. And this is the way it is. But from the day that Chuck Fletcher got that phone call, the day after the season's over, he hadn't even had his availability to tell everybody, the media, like, oh, this is our wrap up on the season. This is what happened. This is why we couldn't win that game 7, all that, right? All that stuff. Right. Before he's even had a chance to do that, he knows in the back of his mind, and he's not going to say anything because it's a private decision for a player, but he knows in the back of his mind, I might have to prepare for not having this guy next year. So they knew.
Right. Just because you found out at the last minute doesn't mean the team found out at the last minute.
They already knew. Prepare for life without Matt Niskanen.
Yep.
And that's fine.
And honestly, as a team, you're thinking about that with any player who's kind of that age. You're considering, hey, he might come to me and tell me he's done.
Do you think the Boston Bruins for the last 4 years haven't gone into the offseason thinking, what if this was Zdeno Chara's last year?
Well, I mean, they keep signing the 1-year contracts, so they know.
Oh, I know, but every year you have to think about it. Like every year we have that same narrative. You know, is this the last time? And how do you replace that? And literally, Zdeno Chara has lost a step. He's lost some of the ability over the years.
2 or 3 steps. Let's be honest. He's not what he was even a couple of years ago.
But I've got a friend who's a Boston fan, and I've said this several times in watching Zdeno Chara specifically. I go, the older he gets, like he's 42 now. He was like, so 2 years ago when he was 40, even if he wasn't going to hang it up then, I'm like, I go in and I watch every time I watch him play. I watch it with more appreciation that might be the last time I watch a future Hall of Famer.
Absolutely.
And we know it.
He's one of those guys. He'll have a statue outside that building.
Yeah, quite possibly, especially for the cup win. Sure.
And in form, it better be the tallest statue.
Well, exactly. And that's the thing. Here's a guy who kind of, in a sense, was introduced to the league as a freak of nature. Like, look how tall this guy is.
Yep.
Proved to be one of the most effective defensemen of the last 20 years.
On the ice in the 2004 Ottawa Senators, Philadelphia Flyers third period with the most penalty minutes in NHL history.
He got in a fight with Matthias Tamander.
Yeah.
The pair of number 3's going at it because
big old tough guy Zdeno Chara going after Matthias Tamander.
Matthias Tamander, I think, was what, 5'10"?
Yeah,
and here's like 6'9" Zdeno Chara just beating the crap out of him. He was not a large
or tough player.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. But teams prepare for that, right? Like the older a guy gets, teams prepare for the guy to be not with them anymore. And I feel like Boston's done that already because Chara's in that position, especially at 42, where you sit there and you go, I've won a cup. I've done this. I've done that. Do I have anything else left to even do this for? Do I want to go and do this, for another year? Do I want to do it in the possibly crazy circumstances again? Because I just did the crazy circumstances, and boy, was it challenging for that team in particular, because it was one of those situations where it kind of looked like they almost didn't necessarily want to be there. It started to set in as that time went on. This is too much. This is too much. And we're tired of this. We're just going home. Like Tuukka Rask went home because something was more important than that. And it was, I'm done. And I think that sat with a lot of the players.
Yeah, it's
And
weird seeing the old generation and the new generation in Boston, because
yeah,
Charlie McAvoy didn't look tired.
no,
A
he
lot of
didn't.
your youth, right? Even like Jake DeBrusk looked really good in that series.
There's a reason why they've invested now in McAvoy, in Brandon Carlo, in
Yep.
Matt Grzelcyk.
They
Like,
have to.
well, they have to, but they've been good players too. It's not like they're
Right.
poor players. They've got a good core that's younger on the blue line, and then they've got veterans too.
It's super annoying. Boston's just going to be good for the next decade, and it's infuriating.
Well, eventually they'll run into cap trouble with that one. So.
Eventually, Patrice Bergeron has to retire, right?
Well, yes, eventually he does.
Because he's going to play at least 1 year beyond Zdeno Chara just so he can wear the C. It. He's got to wear it once.
He's the shoe-in to get it. Yeah, I feel like that's
if he's
for
there,
sure,
he's got it. He has earned it. That man, I'm curious if that man has been an alternate the longest. Like if they're the longest captain alternate captain duo in the league.
I mean, there are guys who just embrace the role and never worry about being captain. But yeah,
no, I know, but I'm curious if that's the longest tenured duo. Who else is up there? Ben Sagan, but they haven't had the A and the C for that long.
Well, that's because Sagan hasn't been in Dallas long enough.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
That's why 9 years ago he was winning a Stanley Cup with Boston.
Yeah, McKinnon, Landeskog might do it if they stay together over there.
There are
They've
teams
got potential.
But there are teams that over time look at the guy who becomes the best player and says that's it. We're just making that change now.
We saw San Jose toss it around a while.
Even if the captain of the team is still on the roster,
right? That's what I'm saying. Patrick Marleau,
they just do it.
Patrick Marleau got to see stripped in San Jose.
Yeah,
back down to an A for, I believe, Joe Thornton, right?
Well, and here's the thing: the greatest players in the world can sometimes not necessarily be the best captains.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, let's put it this way: a name I've thrown out on the show multiple times before because I love the player growing up, Mike Modano.
Yeah,
great alternate. Got to see it didn't translate the same way, and sometimes it's okay. It's okay to be that way. It's okay to not, to be a leader by example, to be a good locker room guy, to be a team player, and you don't have to have the letter.
Oh, right. Of course.
Because that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say that Modano as a captain was terrible. It's the pressures of dealing with it, because as soon as you're the captain, you answer for everybody. You're on top of it takes away from sometimes it takes away from your own game because of the fact that you have to answer for the entire team. You're expected to be the go-to guy. And not that he wasn't already on that team, because he was their star player, even though he wasn't the captain all those years. But captaincy almost fits roles like in 99 when the Stars won a Stanley Cup. Captaincy fits guys like Derian Hatcher, who can shoulder the leadership role and aren't necessarily the best player by ability on the team.
I can see the headline on sportstalkphilly.com now. Kevin Durso, Modano was a bad captain.
No, I'm not saying that. There's a lot of people that actually would say that, though. Like, remember those years that he was captain and go, that didn't work out. Like, it didn't translate the way that everybody thought it was going to.
I think there was a lot of pressure on him as just kind of one of the more predominant American players in that era. And I think him wearing the C in Dallas, there was a lot of pressure around being one of the Southern teams. And, I think he shouldered a lot of that responsibility.
Okay. Well, but I'm getting away from the original question, which is about
we are very far away from where this conversation started.
Yeah, because we were talking about Erik Gustafson and how you're trying to replace Matt Niskanen.
Right, okay. But let's move beyond that, because we're not trying to replace Matt Niskanen. Let's go back. Matt Niskanen is now gone.
Well, but let's go back to Gustafson for a minute and just explain again, because
Gustafson is now here.
But that's the biggest mistake. You're right. We're not trying to replace Matt Niskanen, and the biggest mistake that people perceive from it is that this is the Matt Niskanen replacement. Here's what I will say about that. It is the Matt Niskanen replacement in body, in terms of this is the roster spot. This is the guy that fills the spot. It's not the role. It is not the style. You really weren't going to find a guy who fit that style, because if you would like to find a right-handed defenseman who has some scoring ability, can put up some points, plays defense really well, consummate leader, go get Alex Pietrangelo.
Right. Congratulations. Good luck trying to find that guy for under $8 million.
Right. Exactly. Well, and under 8 or under 9 even. Like,
well, that's
good
what
luck
I'm
trying to
saying.
get him
You
under
cannot
9, like,
find that guy for under 8. You're paying more
Right.
than 8 for him.
correct. And they didn't even have that kind of cap space at that point in time. So
Exactly.
forget that. You were the thing that I think and this is where I understand some frustration from the fan base, is I think the thing they wanted to see them do is either fill a significant hole, which pretty much there were 2, the
Okay.
defensive position that was left from Niskanen retiring, and finding a pure goal scorer, because everybody still is on the Patrick Laine deal, right? They still want to see that happen. I will say again, first of all, scoring is a luxury. You don't go and get it first. You go and get it last. You wait and see if the budget allows for you. If you haven't developed one,
Right.
you wait, which you might be developing one right now. You don't know that yet, but you wait to see if the budget allows for you to go and make that kind of a deal before you do it. That you go, I've got all my other areas covered. All the other bases are covered. Got the goalie, got a good defensive core, got a good forward core that has some good two-way ability. We got penalty killers. We got power play guys. Now I need that one guy who I can stick on my power play and my top line and say, go out there and score,
deadly.
and go out and score 45 goals next year.
So you like that they patched the hole on defense here, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the reason that I think what would make people happy is you need to address the holes. And so far, you either, like, they didn't go out and get a pure scorer, obviously, because it's a luxury. It's hard to find.
Right.
But they didn't replace the defensive hole either, because right now they've replaced it partially.
Right. And
here's a guy who can play the minutes.
Gustafson isn't necessarily the best defensively.
Well, here's the thing about Gustafson. Here's a guy who replaces Niskanen in, I think, 2 areas. He's got offensive ability.
Yep.
And he can play the right side. And he has the ability to play a good amount of minutes.
Right. Well, that would be 3 areas.
Yeah, I know. I
added
one.
Also, I think he gives you a little bit of that leadership, a little bit of that veteran presence. To
an extent, I don't think it's as great as Niskanen, obviously, because here's a guy who's 27, 28, right? Like,
right, but
more in the prime of his career.
On the Flyers defensive core, he's the old man, right? We talk about all these 23, 24, 22, 23, 24-year-olds. Having a guy who's 27 kind of serves a similar purpose that signing a guy who's 32 carries, right? It's just somebody with the years.
Right. And here's the thing. They didn't exactly sit there and say, we're committing to this guy for the next 5 years. They took a year contract at $3 million.
Right.
Which,
this is
first
a
of all,
contract that you can easily flip if he doesn't work out.
So by the way,
gone.
No, so by the way, Erik Gustafson and Justin Braun's re-signing adds up to $4.8 million of the $5.75 that Niskanen was going to make anyway. So basically, you just there is your 2 people to an extent. Now, of course, you would like to sit there and say, because you already know what Justin Braun is, because you've seen him, you want to,
and he's not
that's
great.
What they want. No, but that's what they want. They want fresh blood who they can sit there and say, you're more of the defensive guy. And I don't know if that's already existing. Like, let's this way, maybe the guy who's defensive or who has the ability to be better defensively, maybe it's Mark Friedman this year.
I have a question for you. Is there any chance Igor Zamula makes the team?
No.
Okay.
And I only say that because lately I've heard more things about guys needing more time. They appreciated that he got that game in the exhibition, but they feel like he needs to play in more games at the pro level.
Okay. I was just curious because I didn't know if he was a guy who could maybe come out of nowhere and fill this role unexpectedly.
I don't think that it's impossible for him to play at the NHL level this year. That I will say. But if you think it's going to happen on opening night, think again.
It's unlikely. Okay.
Yeah. That's where I'm going with it. Like, I don't think he's ready to make this team whenever they start. I think he's ready to be on this team. The longer it goes, the more, and hopefully the more he trains. I mean, if he trains the way that Ivan Provorov does, then you got something.
All right, listen, if we can get the whole team training like Ivan Provorov trains, then I think we're in shape. I think the team's about to make a pretty deep run here. But Erik Gustafson, the player. So this is not the Erik Gustafson from the Flyers of previous years.
Oh yeah.
We have to address it because somebody's going to say it.
I put this in the text chat with all of us because I even said I know what his number was in Chicago, and I'm not was it in Calgary? I don't think it was in Calgary. Maybe it was.
I'm not really sure.
I don't remember. It was a very brief stay in Calgary. We know this.
It was a deadline 7 deal. Regular season games and then 10 games in the bubble.
Playoffs. That was it. Yeah. But he wore 56 with Chicago.
Okay.
And I even said, if we can just let everybody repurpose anybody who happened to have an Eric Gustafson jersey from like 6 years ago.
If your parents bought you an Eric Gustafson jersey for Christmas, I'm
I
sorry.
I liked the player then though. Like he was an okay little player for a bottom third, like a bottom three, like a third pairing.
For on a bad team.
Well, on a bad team, sure, but he actually gave you a little something. Like he had some pop to him.
No,
Like,
totally. A lot of times bad teams give you some really fun players because guys who shouldn't be playing get some ice time.
And he had some pop to his game in terms of the offensive side, obviously. Like he was a smaller guy, he had mobility. He was okay defensively. It sounds a lot like the guy we're talking about right now, right?
You sure it's not the same? Have they ever been in the same room?
I think this one's taller.
Okay. I believe this one's also 4 years older, so that kind of cracks that theory wide open. But either way, this is not the guy who played for the Flyers several years ago. This is a guy who spent some time in Chicago and a couple years ago put up 60 points. And that's kind of what that's how a lot of people remember him, because Chicago didn't make a ton of headlines this past year. He's not a 60-point guy. He's a guy who got 60 points once.
No, but here's what I do think. I do think he is a 40-point guy, which is what Matt Niskanen was.
I agree.
Like,
but he's not as good as defensively as Matt Niskanen, which is
I agree with that. But I do think you've replaced what numbers he was able to give you, especially if you do use him on the power play.
Is Eric Gustafson just Shane Gostisbehere?
I don't think he's just Shane Gostisbehere, because I think that he's better defensively than Shane Gostisbehere is.
But you get the concern. Is the Eric Gustafson signing a bad sign for Shane Gostisbehere in terms of his career in Philadelphia?
Yes and no. And let's just wait. It's a concern, because if you basically sign a guy who is very similar to you,
right?
What does that tell you about yourself with 3 years and $4.5 million per on the contract?
You're not exactly high on the totem pole.
That to me tells me I'm on the block, and I'm very concerned. Obviously. Now, granted, I don't think there's a lot of takers because of the flat cap, so you're kind of safe. I think that here's the thing I think about Gostisbehere this year, and this is why you're going to hear about this a lot. And I wanted to talk about this. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about when it came to the signing was Gus, because it's going to be Gus and Ghost. Do they go together, or does Ghost have to go now? Right. And I know a lot of people would love to see it happen, because yes, they're frustrated by Gostisbehere. They don't like the on again, off again thing. They don't like the
contract has flipped. We all thought it was going to be the best value contract ever.
Sure.
And now it looks like such an albatross around the team's neck.
Right.
It's so funny.
Well, and here's the thing that what I talk about, or what I feel like I keep coming back to when it comes to the construction of this roster right now, is you've got to stop putting it on Chuck Fletcher for trying to do stuff with other people's signings. Shane Gostisbehere was not his signing. He didn't give him 6 years at 4.5 mil per because of one good 50-point season or 60-point season, right?
In the same way that we want to talk about Ron Hextall and how he deserves a lot of the credit for this team, he also deserves, in this example, blame for the Shane Gostisbehere contract.
Well, like I said, to me, the two contracts everybody wants to move are both Ron Hextall contracts. They're not Paul Holmgren contracts.
Right.
They're Ron Hextall contracts. They're Shane Gostisbehere and James Van Riemsdyk.
I know that I've been a little bit of a cheerleader for Ron Hextall, and I stand by all of that for sure. But yes, you also have to acknowledge that he signed a couple of poor contracts in his day.
There's no GM out there is perfect. Okay.
Absolutely.
So here's the thing. If Ron Hextall's miss defensively was bought into Shane Gostisbehere's hype for a couple good years and signed him to a big deal,
but not even a huge deal, just kind of a big deal,
but also drafted Provorov and Sanheim and signed Myers as an undrafted free agent. Well, I'm sticking just to the position. If you had one miss on with a defenseman for signing him to a big contract because he had a big year, right, and drafted a bunch of others that proved to be better,
it's not too much of a problem.
It's the same thing to me with, James Van Riemsdyk was his bad signing at forward, but you drafted other guys. You drafted Morgan Frost, and you drafted you did draft Nolan Patrick, and that's a bit of a question mark too. But you drafted Travis Konechny, and you started to give people the idea, you got to give him credit for the preaching of patience when it came to Sean Couturier is still only 24, 25. Give it time. He'll get there. 27. He's a Selke winner.
I'm sure there was pressure on Ron Hextall. I'm sure there was pressure on Ron Hextall to move Sean Couturier.
Scott Lawton's another example too, and that's not a draft pick of Hextall's.
I'm sorry,
But
did Hextall sign the Couturier contract?
Probably.
Because if Hextall signed the Couturier contract, in my mind, he gets a pass for Ghost.
Probably.
Because let's look at it like this. They both make about 4.5. Realistically, Sean Couturier should probably make about 7. Ghost should make about 2.5. They roughly cancel each other out in terms of value in my book.
Right. I mean,
Ghost is a little overpaid at this point. Sean Couturier is a little underpaid at this point. I'm willing to give Ron Hextall a pass on that.
Well, here's the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to Gustafson too, because
for sure,
the thing that I said this to you guys in the chat because I knew it was one of the topics I wanted to bring up. The thing that I hate the most about the offseason, especially when it's as long as this one's been and going to be. And it's funny I say how long it's been because it's been what, 3 weeks? I mean, literally, the offseason so far has been about a month long.
The Flyers offseason has been a little longer.
No, well, true, but I'm saying, like, you knew that there was nothing that really could be done. I mean, what happens in the 3 weeks when you're not in the playoffs anymore and you're waiting for the Stanley Cup award? You can basically re-sign your own guys.
Right.
And realistically, they've done just about all of that. I mean, he's gone out and taken care of every restricted free agent contract except for Phil Myers,
which literally just Phil Myers at this point.
Right. It's Phil Myers, and that's it. And obviously, there's nothing that's threatening that he's not going anywhere. He'll be back. And I think what they're trying to do is negotiate for term and cap hit for him specifically that fits the flat cap so that he doesn't feel like they're in trouble.
Okay.
It's not because I don't think you're sitting there looking at Phil Myers and going, whatever you want, you're not worth. You know, I think what you're trying to do is sit there and say, if you can bear with us, kind of like Lindblom, if you can bear with us for a couple of years, because we know finances are not going to look good. I hope it's the smallest contract you ever sign because you're going to be worth more than this.
Right. And as we're sitting here, the Flyers have, according to Cap Friendly, the Flyers are sitting on approximately $4.8 million in cap space.
Which is interesting because to me, I wonder if you couldn't even go long-term with Myers and say for 5 years, here's $3.5 million.
Man,
it feels too early to go there.
The only reason I'm concerned about that is because we know the cap is staying flat. Next year, you have Scott Lawton, who's going to need a raise. Travis Sanheim's up with arbitration rights. Carter Hart has to get signed. Nolan Patrick is up again. I don't know if I can go long term at 4.5 on Phil Myers at this point. And the only contract you're losing
is Raffle
and Brian Elliott. Oh, I'm sorry, and Eric Gustafson now.
Right, so that's another one of them. Well, okay, there's a couple other things that kind of come into play too, because I do think
it gets hairy.
There is buyout money that doesn't get allocated next year, which is a huge thing because right now their hands are tied their hands are tied with buyout money this year that could have helped them.
Yeah, they're still sitting on 1.9 from Andrew McDonald and $600,000 from David Schlemko, so they're sitting on about $2.5 million of dead cap.
Just bear in mind that the Andrew McDonald buyout contract is worth more than Justin Braun this year.
Yep.
And that could have been Justin Braun's contract.
To be fair, I'd rather have Justin Braun on the team than Andrew McDonald, so I'm fine with that.
Well, I know, but I'm saying that 1.9 goes a long way in A, free agency discussions, and B, keeping your own players maybe longer term and knowing you're okay in the flat cap.
Yeah. So you know what? It's not quite as hairy as maybe I thought it was.
I think. But nonetheless, okay, so let me go back to what I was trying to get with that point.
Yeah.
So the offseason, the thing I hate about the offseason, especially when it's as long as this one's going to feel, is I really hate speculation about what a player is going to look like before we actually see it.
Right.
Okay.
I think people forget the players work out in the offseason. No, players get better. Players.
And here's why I hate it. I know we can sit there and look at what a player's done in the past and have a track record of things and all that. And I understand that there's weight to that. I'm not saying there's not weight to Eric Gustafson's a good offensive defenseman. He can put up 40 points a year. No problem, certainly. It seems like. And he can give you some significant minutes, but he's not going to light it up defensively.
There's not huge pressure on him to be the guy. He can blend in pretty well with the core, I think.
Right. But so what I'm saying about this is this. Why are we so worried about this right now when we haven't even been able to see a practice, not see it physically, but to see, okay, what line combinations come out of the first practice of the year and how much?
I was about to ask you that.
Like, and what weight comes out of it? Like, how do we know that on day one that the instant top pairing for the Flyers isn't Ivan Provorov, Phil Myers? And that's the guy who jumps up and replaces.
Yeah. The top pairing on opening night, you think there's potential that it's Provorov Myers?
I think there's potential for it. I think that And I think you could get creative. I wouldn't, obviously there's one thing I would not do with this signing, and that would be don't put Ghost and Gus together. You can't put two offensive minded guys just because one plays left and one is able to play right, though he's a left-handed shot. I think that,
I would much rather have Gustafson next to a guy like Sanheim who can play offensively.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Much more reliable defensively.
And I think that could work. I honestly think that, what else could even work? Gustafson could possibly work with a Hager Braun.
Oh, that would be fun. I wouldn't mind Gustafson, Robert Hag.
Like, it could work.
And then that leaves you with Sanheim, Gostisbehere, which we've seen work
or
in the
Sanheim
past.
Braun.
Or Sanheim Braun. Well, we've seen Sanheim Gostisbehere work in the past. And Sanheim Braun.
Sanheim Braun has worked better than other combinations. It's worked better than Hag Braun. It's worked better than Gostisbehere Braun.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm concerned that AV has it locked in that it's got to be Sanheim Myers because of how good they were together.
And I understand that. I wonder. I don't know how you're supposed to try to play. I mean, let's just say they could go out there and give Gustafson a shot on the top pair if they really wanted to. He does qualify as a top 4 for his role, for his minutes and his role. I don't know it's going to work.
Right.
And I think that's the concern. But here's the thing. That's the point. We don't know the answer to that question. And until we do, let's stop reading too much into stuff like this. Let's stop reading into too much because let's this way. All it takes is one weekend of camp and Phil Myers comes back looking better than ever. And they go, there's no holding him back anymore. He's got to go up.
Man, how good is that top pair?
Now he's the top guy. And to me, if Erik Gustafson is going to play the right side as your 4th defenseman alongside Sanheim, I can live with that.
Yeah.
Now I don't feel like he's as much. Now I feel like he's more of a Niskanen replacement than before because he's not playing the second. He's not the top pair right D. He's the second pair right D with offensive ability to make up for what Niskanen gave you, with the ability to play the minutes. And I don't care that he doesn't have the best defensive ability because I'd like to see it at that point because it's the middle of the pack. It's not the number 1 guy. People are afraid of him being the number 1 guy because of his defensive liability.
Right.
But he is.
And then in the meantime, you get a very, very, very talented top pair. And Phil Myers has potential to surpass what Matt Niskanen was giving you last season. And instead of being a Niskanen replacement, even go beyond that.
Right. So,
and I'm not necessarily saying he will, but I think he's got the potential.
But those are the things.
That's where you're at with a very young team.
Right. But those are the things that frustrate me the most about the offseason is that for the better part of a week, it was watching to see if there was anything else out there because you felt like you still needed a pure right-handed shot defenseman. You needed somebody who was better defensively. And I'm not trying to sit there and say that they're not going to there's no way that Erik Gustafson makes them a better team defensively at the defensive position than they were with Matt Niskanen. There's no way. But certainly not. But let's put it this way. If the method that comes out of it, when Chuck Fletcher gets asked about Gustafson being signed and the idea of Gustafson and Gostisbehere being on the same team together, not the same pairing, obviously, but the same team. The idea is that if we're playing offense more often, then we're defending less. So maybe that'll be a way to go. I'm not saying that that's a strategy to live by, but let's see if it works that way before you go crazy with it. And, and not only that, but let's see if anybody else comes in and develops better. Like I said, Mark Friedman's a guy who's been waiting in the wings for a long time, has gotten a taste of the NHL, has looked good when he's gotten a taste of the NHL, and he's not going to be a lighted up offensively guy.
No. He's
there to play the back end more. He can move the puck. It's not like he's immobile. But let's see where he goes with this. You know what I mean? So let's just kind of see where the whole thing goes. Because collectively, I think with Gustafson, they've got 8 really good defensemen who can all play in an NHL lineup somewhere.
Yeah, and I wonder if we've talked about what next season's going to look like and if the AHL is going to run and potential expanded rosters. I wonder if the Flyers just carry 8 or 9 defensemen next season and just that third pair kind of just rotates in and out, or there's mixing and matching. And we've talked about the fact that the schedule next year might be a little condensed to try to bring things back towards October to May. I'm curious if teams are going to carry extra defensemen and we're going to see a little more rotation in the lineup and a little more platooning than we generally see. And if that's the case, you carry all these guys, right? When Gustafson's not in, Ghost is in that role. You kind of see this rotation in the bottom four.
Right. And I don't look, I definitely think they haven't had the ability to trade Ghost if they wanted to, because they're not getting an offer that they think they deserve for him.
Yeah, it's tough. It's hard
And
to
it's
get
going to be
positive
tough.
value for Ghost at this point.
And it's not as simple as saying trade Gostisbehere for Patrick Line. You know what I mean?
Certainly not.
This is not, again, this is not forced trades in NHL.
No.
In
honestly,
EA
at this
Sports
point,
NHL.
And by the way, I do just want to shout out EA Sports for an awful rating on Shane Gostisbehere. How is he an 85 in franchise mode?
I didn't even notice that, to be honest.
You make your best lines and they put him like on your top pair. He's like an 85 with medium elite potential. Listen, Ghost, I love you, buddy. You played like an 80 last year, max.
80 might be generous.
80 might be generous. 80s don't get healthy scratched for half the season.
Correct.
Sorry. Either way, I didn't mean to take that sideways shot at Ghost. That was really a shot at EA Studios. I'm sorry about that.
But nonetheless, like, I do think that what they're coming to terms with is that they're going to have him for another year. I'm not saying that's the way they wanted it to be. It's just that's like, I think they're stuck with him for right now because flat cap. Not the best year. You're going to be selling low anyway. Retain. Well, and you're going to be selling low anyway.
Yep.
Like, you got to know that it's not going to be Gostisbehere for a big name. It's going to be Gostisbehere for like
rehab
a fifth.
Is the way to go.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, he is going to come back healthy, and to me, this is it. You got.
I meant rehabbing his career.
Oh well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. This is
rehabbing his value.
You got one more shot.
Right.
Here at least you got one more shot, and that's it. Then after that, it's over.
If not, in Philly, I think the Philadelphia Flyers trade a second pick and Shane Gostisbehere to the Seattle Kraken.
It would be interesting.
I mean, at this point.
But that was the other thing with Gustafson too.
At this point,
by giving Gustafson a 1-year deal, you avoid the expansion thing.
Yep. Because
now we know who the 3 defensemen who are going to be protected are going to be. We've known it for a while. And they're not going to be able to change that. And by the way, that's another reason why you might see a little less of Zamula. I know it doesn't really affect him, but just to not start his
profile low.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no reason to shine a big old bright light on him.
So speaking of signings, do we want to get into some of these other names from
go
around
for
the
it.
league?
Because we'll throw some out there. There's been some weird movement since our last show.
What's it called too? We kind of teased some of these. Like, we knew that they were out there, and like within a day or two of the show getting posted, here we go. So I think the 2 big ones were Taylor Hall went to Buffalo for a year.
Taylor Hall, 1 year, $8 million, correct?
Yes.
$8 million to be a Buffalo Sabre. So I guess there is a price for how much you have to pay somebody to go play in Buffalo.
I guess. I mean,
you know what this is? This reads to me as a desperate plea to Jack Eichel. Please, for the love of God, don't demand a trade. Right?
I mean, it does to an extent, I'm sure, but
you know what? Honestly, for Buffalo, I kind of love this deal.
Well, and here's the thing about this deal in particular. You're right, because this is a Jack Eichel has some issues with the way things have gone over the last few years. This is the best way we can show him that there is an element of seriousness to making a significant improvement.
Oh, right. Taylor Hall has to be the best player Jack Eichel's ever played with. Probably. At the NHL level, right?
Probably. And I mean,
Not
it's going to be
a whole lot.
Yeah. I mean, well, compared to who else he's probably been able to play with. I mean, I guess you got the years of Evander Kane and things like that, but that was, before Kane was even really a top, not top name, but like he's gotten better with time in San Jose.
Right.
And that turned out to work out for them. I mean, it was just surprising because I don't think anybody really thought Buffalo was going to be, I mean, aside from the money of it, Buffalo had the space for sure.
Yeah. But I'm also kind of surprised they're willing to spend that kind of cash. Just given the financial state of where these franchises are at right now.
The thing that was the most surprising about the deal, I think, is that it is a 1-year deal. When you get a big name like that, who's on the market, who everybody knew, usually it's the type of guy who wants the long-term commitment, especially, and Taylor Hall, especially because Taylor Hall's played for what, going from Edmonton to New Jersey to Arizona. Now you're going to play in Buffalo. You're kind of becoming a well-traveled guy.
And
for a top pick.
And how many playoff appearances?
Yeah, that's it.
You know, I think he's got 5 career playoff games, 10 career playoff games, something like that. Like
10 sounds more
it's
more
a
correct
pretty it's a pretty low number. Taylor Hall doesn't have a lot of winning experience.
But it's just interesting, like because 1 year is very much not only a big cash grab for him, but it's also a big gamble on both sides because Buffalo's taking a chance that they might be able to keep him long term after the 1 year deal.
Right.
And Hall's taking a chance that he's going to have some knockout year that could raise his stock even more than 1 year, 8 million.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think it's a great deal for both sides here because you have Taylor Hall going, well, this is a year where nobody has cash because nobody's got people in the buildings. Like people aren't getting paid right now. Not really.
Correct.
Right. I'm sure we'll talk about Tyler Toffoli.
Mm-hmm.
But people aren't really getting paid right now. So Taylor Hall took the most he could for 1 year. Next year, I guess he's banking on teams having a little bit more capital and him being able to sign a little bit of a longer deal. And also teams know the cap is flat, know it's coming. So, there's a little bit of strategy there. And then on the Buffalo side, you get Taylor Hall for 1 year, $8 million. You get a chance to prove to Jack Eichel that you're serious about giving him talented players to play with.
Right.
And then if things go poorly and you're 25 points out of a playoff position because you're Buffalo, you trade him at the deadline, you retain money. A lot of teams are going to be interested in giving up something for Taylor Hall, especially if he's got 35 goals playing with Jack Eichel.
Right. And I mean, he's just an interesting player because I feel like for a guy who's put his name in the Hart conversation, won it,
dragged the New Jersey Devils to the playoffs last year or a couple
2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, it's an interesting move for him collectively. Like it's not the type of team that you thought he was going to necessarily go to. I mean, I know there were people who thought he was going to stick with Arizona to an extent, but there was also I think people were thinking it was going to be a team that had a shot to win because he's been around long enough that that's what's going to be most important.
Right.
He's going to have to kind of will that team with him and Jack Eichel are going to have to really will it to something significant. So
yeah, I think Buffalo paid $8 million for 40 games at Taylor Hall, a first round pick and a prospect.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean,
and honestly, for Buffalo, that's probably a win.
It probably is, but
as a franchise,
it probably is. But if I'm Jack Eichel, I don't love the way that looks at all because at that point in time, to me, if you're sitting here saying I signed this guy to a 1 year deal because if we weren't good enough, then I could, bounce him and and just essentially it's like it
doesn't show the commitment to winning. It's a half measure for sure.
Right. Well, it's Well, it's like flipping a house. It's like I got him for this price, and now I'm going to flip him and get a pick and a prospect because we're not making the playoffs this year. But what does it tell your star player
on the sideline? Right, Jack
Eichel's
living in the attic, going, "Hey,
right,
I still live here."
I mean, so you got that, and then from the most surprising signing to the least surprising signing, which was Pietrangelo going to Vegas. We kind of saw that coming last or 2 weeks ago.
The single least surprising signing was Marlowe.
The second
least surprising signing was Pietrangelo to the Vegas Golden Knights.
Right.
But either way, Pietrangelo signed the biggest ticket of the offseason for sure.
Sure. 7 years, 8.8 mil average.
You're not what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas for 2 to 4 years and then they ship it out.
Well, or they try to anyway, because they wanted to with Marc-Andre Fleury.
They're still sitting on Marc-Andre Fleury.
And they said they're going to keep him.
Yep. Well,
so that's really interesting. I mean, you're going to have that. You know what this says to me, quite honestly, then? That says to me that if that team doesn't win the Stanley Cup next year, that it feels like a bust. Like the year feels like a bust. Because if you're going to keep Fleury after that, kind of just go, all right, you know what? Fine. We got Lehner, who we signed for 5 years, who we expect to be our goalie going forward. And we got Fleury as the backup, who's just going to be able to, take some of the load off,
See, I think it's Vegas looking at the rest of the league and refusing to be strong-armed, because as soon as they come out and sign Lehner, that forces their hand on Fleury. And I'm sure the price on Fleury immediately became, hey, why don't you give us a first-round pick to take that contract? And Vegas went, nope, we're keeping him. You're also going
to have teams that the second a goalie gets hurt are going to become so desperate.
Sure.
And the patience will pay off for Vegas in that regard.
Sure. But at the moment, I don't necessarily buy this. We're keeping him. He's our backup. We're a 2-goalie system. I don't buy it. I think this is Vegas holding firm and putting forth a poker face, pun intended. Hello, Vegas, and stonewalling the rest of the league and saying, no, you don't want to pay our price. We'll keep him.
But well, see, that being said, the their forward core doesn't exactly have a pure superstar per se. I mean, Mark Stone's the closest.
Mark Stone's a pretty good player.
He's good, but he had his
Max
moments.
Pacioretty's a pretty good,
but Max Pacioretty's getting older at this point in time,
well, sure.
and I still think you're living off of like among the other forwards anyway.
William Karlsson scored 40 goals that one time.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. You're living off of that, and you gave him a big contract for that.
Although I will credit Elliot Friedman for this little piece of knowledge. Apparently, every single player in Vegas is touchable. Nobody is untouchable, right? Everyone's willing to move.
Sure, yeah, I guess.
Except for Riley Smith.
Seriously?
Elliot Friedman, 31 Thoughts podcast. Riley Smith is untouchable for them. They will not listen to offers. And I imagine there are probably a couple other people on that name. I imagine Marchessault is probably there, maybe even Karlsson. But Riley Smith apparently is one of those players that they're looking at as a star of that team.
That's okay. I do think he's good. Marchessault, I think, is very touchable though. Like I think Marchessault is a guy that they would unload if they could.
Man, we got to stop saying touchable.
Well, no, but you know what I mean. Like
I know.
Like I think he would be the type of guy who finds himself on a trading block at some point.
I don't disagree with you.
I mean, that's the name. It was one of the first names I heard when it came to Pietrangelo is going to sign. He's going to sign for 8.8 mil, which means that they're going to go over cap. Like they're allowed to in free agency, but that means someone's got to go. And obviously, like we know now, Nate Schmidt was the guy who went, and it was a pretty cheap deal.
No. When they signed Pietrangelo, they were going over the offseason allowance. And that's why they needed to trade Nate Schmidt to get back under the off-season 10% allowance or whatever it is. They're still over cap.
Yeah, they are.
They are still over cap.
Which is why people are still saying about Fleury and Marchessault and guys like that, because they're thinking, and even let's put it this way, even still among the defensemen, that like Alec Martinez's name hasn't gone away,
right?
Per se. I mean, like I haven't heard a whole lot in that regard. Like I think now the trade market, especially we're now 3 weeks into free agency.
Something like
So there's names out there who still haven't signed and are waiting it out as long as they can.
There are good names. Has Sammy Vatanen found a team yet?
No. Mikael Granlund still out there.
If
Mike Hoffman's still out there, there's another one. How about that one?
Right.
I'm not saying for value. Like I don't.
He is the closest thing to a pure goal scorer that's out there. If the Flyers can manage to trade Shane Gostisbehere, I wouldn't mind them taking a run at Sammy Vatanen.
Vatanen doesn't stay healthy enough for my liking, and that's gonna be the problem.
And I want Sammy Vatanen to be what Shane Gostisbehere was. I just want him to be what Shane Gostisbehere was at $1 million instead of $4.5 million.
I don't think he's gonna do that though. That's the problem.
I don't know. I think he might at this point. I think he would take a 1 year, $1 million bet on myself.
I think there's a lot of guys who are still out there who would take a 1 year deal. I do agree.
But if you trade Shane Gostisbehere, free up that money, sign Myers to 2x2 or whatever, then you can throw a little bit of money at Mike Hoffman.
I mean, here's the thing. Hoffman is a guy who would infuriate people here.
I mean, sure, but we said the same things about Line and people still want him.
Well, I think anybody who's a scorer would. I mean, Line would probably be better defensively than Hoffman would, because Hoffman's really a liability.
You can stick Hoffman on your third line.
You could.
Oh,
true.
man. Obey Kubel, Patrick, Mike Hoffman. That's your third line. You stick them on the power play unit. What's the problem? Listen, you sign all these guys to 1 year deals. You trade Shane Gostisbehere, sign all these guys to 1 year deals.
I'll tell you what.
Numbers, you win the cup.
I'll tell you what. If Mike Hoffman wants $5 million, like I think he does, or what he was making last year, then there's no way he's getting it from this team. But if he starts to see if he's observing the market and realizes this is a problem area,
he doesn't think he's getting $5 million
and goes, I might have to settle for 1 year and $2.5 million. Then you know what? Fine, because I know you're going to score 30 goals next year minimum. So fine,
I'm in on it.
Then I'll take it.
I'm doing it in NHL 21 right after this podcast.
But that was like an interesting one. I mean, because Hoffman's teammate from Florida last year, Evgeny Dadonov, signed in Ottawa, which was an interesting
which was
deal.
another
And he
interesting
did get
signing.
$5 million per
Yeah.
for 3 years.
Yeah, which is weird because he got paid by Ottawa.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he's still got something to offer. I think he's going to be a good addition for them.
Ottawa's starting to spend some money. They signed Matt Murray too. I don't know if we talked about them acquiring him on our last show, but I don't know if he had signed.
I think he did.
Okay, but either way, Matt Murray's there for a couple of years.
Because I remember us talking about Matt Murray's new contract because he's making $6.25 million per, and we kind of said that take a little bit off of it maybe, but that could be the baseline for Carter Hart down the road because of the fact that Murray's got two of something that Carter Hart has none of right now and there's lack of experience there obviously, but he's got two of something that really lifts his stock.
He gets to say whatever he wants because he has the words Stanley Cup champion on his resume at 24 years old.
He got it twice. He gets exactly. He's got to say whatever he wants to because before saying Stanley Cup champion on his resume, he gets to add 2-time before it.
Right. He probably should have won the Conn Smythe
that second year.
The second year.
Yep.
And I think Sid got it, and it was kind of a joke. But either way,
I know.
It felt a little bit like a lifetime achievement award, and I get it. Whatever.
So there's that one. You briefly
Nashville
touched on,
still should have beaten him in the Stanley Cup final a couple, but whatever.
I would have loved it, but
that bad whistle.
Yeah, I know.
You know exactly what I'm talking. I think it was game 6. That was awful.
You briefly touched on Tyler Toffoli going to Montreal. That's another.
That's a great signing for Montreal.
It is a great signing for them.
That is such a good signing for Montreal.
Here's the thing I want to talk about with some of these signings or with some of these things, because here again, this kind of touches back a little bit on what I was talking about previously with the wait until the offseason's over, or let's see what it looks like off of paper to judge how good a signing is or not.
Of course.
I think you had shared it too. The chart that came out from The Athletic.
Yeah.
With the, here's the wins.
Teams that got better, teams that got worse.
Game score value improvement over the amount of money that they added or subtracted or whatever. To me, nothing is scary about an offseason where the number or a figure like that shows that the most improved teams are the New Jersey Devils or the Detroit Red Wings or the Buffalo Sabres, all teams who, by the way, didn't play beyond March.
Right.
Like, there's not a playoff team out there, with the exception of maybe Colorado, who actually increased their win total a little based on this. And I get it. There's people out there, like, I'm not trying to preach advanced stats, but but here's what I'm saying with it. Okay, so maybe they improved their win total a little bit, and they didn't spend any more money than they had the previous year to do it because they couldn't, right? So they get a little better without spending more money. The Flyers kind of hovered in that group. And by the way, the Flyers hovered in a category or at a number where Pittsburgh did the same thing, didn't improve any, but shed maybe a little bit more cap space, less cap space than the Flyers did.
Right.
Because they signed more guys to be the same thing. The Rangers were in that category. Teams like Columbus and the Islanders got worse based off of this. Things like that.
But the Islanders aren't beholden to any of these metrics because they're all going to play the Barry Trotz system and it doesn't matter.
True, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying that like on paper, nothing added, like not added up, but nothing changed.
The numbers didn't square up.
Right. Everything. No, actually they did square up, and it's that everybody was relatively the same with the exception of the bottom 3 teams in the conference.
Right.
Ottawa getting better, Detroit getting better, New Jersey getting better, Buffalo getting better. Well, that's great, but they were also the ones that had the most money and didn't win as many games last year. Like, I'm sorry, if you're going to put Detroit at the top of the list and say they've improved by 6 potential wins.
Right. Well,
it's 6 potential wins doesn't change anything in the standings.
No, and it doesn't. And that's why that article isn't super impactful, because going from 15 to 25 wins doesn't really do anything for you. It doesn't do nearly as much for you as going from 43 to 47 wins.
But nonetheless, like, what I'm trying to get is that you can look at something like that and think based off of what you're seeing by the number, but not the numbers. I'm talking about like the signings that are going on. Like, you'll see another guy sign, you go, oh, Dadonov went here and this guy signed here. And that, like, even the smaller signings, like, remember when we were sitting there on day 1 of free agency and
we were going through.
No, and you're going Bobby Ryan to Detroit, Mikko Koivu to Columbus. Boy, those are guys that they could have targeted where, he's off. How about defensemen? It was, TJ Brody to Toronto. Okay. Well, there's another one, all stuff like that. Right.
Nice one.
But the point being that all that stuff can happen and it doesn't necessarily change anything in the grand scheme of things. Like, people are still perceiving the Flyers to be probably one of the top 5 teams in the Eastern Conference next year.
Yeah, I would say so.
Despite
very likely to finish top 3 in the division and get a playoff spot.
Despite the loss of Matt Niskanen, and despite the signing of Eric Gustafson being not a full-on replacement, despite the fact, like, it's why I've tried to say another year for all of the prospects and all the kids who are just getting started in their NHL careers does mean something, because people do take stock in that when they say, well, you're probably going to win close to the same number of games you did because it's not a different team and they're all younger. Like they're only when another year older is only 25. It's not as bad as another year older means you're now 32.
Well, and another year older for your starting goalie means he's going to be, old enough to drink.
Pretty much.
Right? Like,
he's 22 now, so yes, but
okay, but like, come on. The kid can barely grow a playoff beard.
Yeah, I hear you.
But and that's the exciting thing about where this team's at right now is another year isn't a bad thing, right? And Phil Myers is a year older. Travis Sanheim's a year older. Travis Konechny is a year older. We've seen this team grow immensely, even just throughout the last season.
And it's not like because I mentioned before we started recording today that something that happened on Saturday night that I wanted to mention that when it comes to prospects, because this team drafts pretty darn well. And it's gone through like that for a while. Like they've had prospects that we've had reason to get excited about that you wait for a little bit and you hope they make it and hope it translates to the NHL level. But we've had reason to get excited about a lot of prospects.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's still that way. Like, and before I get into the ones from this particular year, many of which are not playing right now, but before I get into that, because that's another thing we should mention, by the way, is a couple of them have signed, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Including the one that has the best name in the draft, according to Kyle.
Absolutely.
Zayd Wisdom got a contract if people don't know what that's all about.
Yeah.
And so did Tyson Forrester.
Yep. And I believe those are the only 2 as of right now, right?
There might be another one coming soon if this other kid keeps going the way he's going, but I'll save that for a moment.
We'll save that.
Because I'm thinking about Cam York. I'm thinking about Bobby Brink. I'm thinking about guys like that who are early on in their time who have generated some excitement. People
some
who
real buzz.
Some real buzz that actually people. I mean, Zamula's like that too. I mean, Zamula's one they're waiting for, but you've got him in the system. You like him.
Kind of in that Phil Myers,
right?
Yeah.
Right, there's guys like Morgan Frost even qualifies because he hasn't really played a whole lot at the NHL level.
The scouting department for this team has done a really phenomenal job over the last several years.
Right, which brings me to this kid in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League who was drafted in the 5th round, who we've mentioned on the show a couple times because of the fact that he was a recent draft pick, Elliot Desnoyers.
Yep.
And Elliot Desnoyers on Saturday night, right before we got to record this show, went out and decided to have probably the best night of his young career so far at that level because he scored 4 goals in a game for Halifax.
Yep. And, none of them were amazing highlight reel, blah, blah. But some of them were all very, very nice.
For what it's worth, and let me start with this. Video for these types of things is not great.
It's tough.
So let's start with that.
It's very dad with a camcorder.
I think his first goal was probably really impressive because it was a sharp angle, quick shot that I'm sure stunned a goalie, which is certainly part of the game.
The announcers sound very impressed.
Yes.
It was hard to see.
The second one was probably more of a routine one. Like obviously his last 2 were more rebound or like just going hard to the net. Like
they were definitely net front presence.
You can't fault him for just going hard to the net though. Like he just went to the net.
Not when you've scored 2 already.
Well, and the fourth one was a give and go which by the way, if I'm not mistaken, the tweet said a 16-year-old.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, like one of Halifax's rookies.
Start scouting that kid.
Yeah, for real. I'm gonna have to look. I should see if I can look up his name because I don't know if he's in there or not. But that would be interesting. But bottom line is, by the way, that's 6 goals and now 12 points. Because by the way, I think he had a pair of assists on Friday. So this weekend he had 6 points. He's gone from 2 goals and 4 assists to 6 and 6 for 12 and 8 games.
He's having a decent weekend.
Well, and here's the other thing about it too. He's one of the only guys playing right now because let's just say the
QMJHL is one of the few leagues running.
Well, the Q is one of the few leagues running first and foremost, and then also has had moments where they've had to shut some things down with other regions. His region is not. Halifax is on this, I think, is on the island region.
Okay.
Because it's Nova Scotia, and
they're relatively all right.
They're doing fine. So they've been playing. I think Friday there were only 3 games in the queue.
Okay.
and there should be on a Friday night, should be probably about 10 to 12.
Okay.
And there was 3. So that tells you kind of where everybody was at and why everybody, shutting everything down.
But either way, I did also want to mention that his fourth goal, Desnoyers' fourth goal, was with about 35 seconds left in a 10-2 game, and he just scored and just little glove tap with the teammates and skate to the bench.
Yeah, he knew. I mean,
he knows he's been there before. He knows that was his fourth goal of the game, and that it's a 10-2 game with 35 seconds left, and he just put his head down and good game.
Okay, so I'm probably going to butcher the name here because it's not somebody we've heard of, but I'll try.
Are you going into the Quebec Major Junior League and guessing names? Good luck.
Well, it's not a terribly difficult name because it's shorter.
Okay.
So Jordan Dumais, it might be because it's Dumais, which
okay. I would imagine that's probably Dumais, but I'm sure one of our French listeners.
That's the 16-year-old right wing. That's the 16-year-old right winger playing with Elliot Desnoyers right now.
Put a note down.
Well, who I'm just letting. He's eligible for the 2022 NHL draft, by the way. So you got a couple years here.
Sounds
but let me just tell you right now that in the queue, he's played 8 games and he's got 3 goals and 4 assists for 7 points. All 4 assists coming last night, by the way, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Have a night, kid.
Have a night, kid. So there you go. I mean, and by the way, whatever 15 under AAA level the last year, whatever, only had 47 goals in 52 games and 125 points.
Oh.
I mean, if this kid's lighting it up early on in the queue in his 16, this is 2 years before his draft year. He should be able to get another full season in.
Yeah.
Like, can we imagine what could be with this?
This kid could be a future first rounder, and you heard about him first. You would think the Philadelphia Flyers podcast.
I mean, Halifax has a good team because there's a couple other guys who I think got drafted. Like Justin Barron got drafted this past year, he's one of their top defensemen. He might be their captain, honestly. I don't know because Desnoyers is a alternate. And I'm sure there's other guys down the list.
I think they're expected to be a decent little team this year.
They might be, and certainly they're getting a lot of experience right now. But
certainly.
I don't know. Now that I know about that kid too, I might have to actually spring for the to watch a game, and try to stream it. The Q streaming system is terrible.
Yeah, I remember watching old Sam Moran highlights, and they're rough.
One of the things I do want to look at, by the way, that I do want to look at among prospects, so to speak. And again, speaking of the Flyers next year, like roster for next year, there's not holes at forward, but there's room to allow for some of these recent signees to take over.
Yep,
and
sure.
The name that I think of that I keep hearing a lot about is Lena Sandeen.
Okay.
Because he's having a pretty darn good year over in Sweden right now.
I wouldn't
kind of
mind
filling the
him
gap
because
he's on loan right now because they've been doing that with a ton of players.
Yeah, there's a lot of loans. Yeah.
But he's doing pretty good. And apparently he's on the same team as Emil Andre.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a reason to kind of keep an eye on that team. And they were supposed to play over the weekend. I'll have to go and check and see if he's got any added numbers because it'll be easy to find. I'm not trying to actually look at specifics in game log, but I just want to see if they actually did anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Because Sandeen has been doing pretty good. Sandeen has played 9 games on loan and has 2 goals and 4 assists for 6 points, which in the SHL is really good.
Yeah.
Let's be real. Let's remember that last year when they signed him, because he was a European, out there, his rights were available as a European player. That they signed him with 51 games in the SHL with 19 goals and 36 points, and we were all going, "That's like the 3rd best goal total in the league."
Right, exactly. He was,
So he was one. Like we're sitting here going, "That's one of the top scorers in the Swedish league," and it's 19 goals. Right. So 2 goals and 6 points in 9 games is actually pretty impressive in that league. And I believe Emil Andre is playing pretty significant minutes over there, and has obviously for a young guy, because Sandeen I think is 24, so he's a lot older. Andre's 18, and he's got.
Hey, we'll let the older kid rub off on the,
But he's got 2 assists in 10 games, which isn't half bad, and
in a men's league, right?
In a men's league at 18, so
in
pretty
a
good stuff.
Full-blown professional adult league.
So now that we got to that, I do want to, before we wrap up the show, because there's only a couple more things to do.
Yeah.
With this at this point, and I would say that the only other thing that I'm looking at this point is is to talk about Doc Emrick really quick, because that was a news drop that came out this past Monday. So when we didn't have a show,
right, but it still would have missed us.
Yes,
Don't get it twisted. It still would have missed us.
And I wrote about it because obviously that's an inspiring thing for me. I mean, obviously, first of all, I've met him a couple of times, and he's as nice a guy as you can imagine.
Sure.
But we've sat here and watched this and talked about broadcasters, and we've mentioned many of them before on the show. And we didn't really expect it. You know, it was kind of a surprising announcement when when it was just out there that he was retiring. It came out early in the morning. It was very much it was very kept close to the chest there on like anything he knew apparently between the second and third round of the playoffs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's what he's been saying. He knew himself then that was going to be it for him, and didn't really talk about it much.
Okay.
You know, and things like that.
And he's one of those guys, he's got the right to go out however he wants.
He's been doing it for almost half a century. Yep. You know, he's got some form of ties to the game for that long, I believe. And he's broadcast on such a big scale for 47 years. And, you know, 22
got some Philly ties in there.
22 Stanley Cup finals. He's called the Olympics 6 times, I think, something like that. Like, he's got a resume that's out of this world. And and then to top it all off, not only a resume that's out of this world, but then a vocabulary that trumps that, because it's just insane how he describes everything for you, and does it with such precision, does it with the energy that the game requires, does it in such a way that you feel like you're actively involved in it. One of the things I used to describe it was he takes the average game in January that is, you know, like
Minnesota
this past year, like let's say it was this past year, he can take Detroit Buffalo in January and turn it into game 7.
Yeah.
With the way that he calls a game, and you get fully invested in this game, even though you have no stake in it whatsoever. And then actually goes out and calls the last game of the Stanley Cup final the way it deserves to be called, with the excitement that goes with it. And
it's still special, right?
I mean, let's put it this way. 2 of the last 3 games he called in the Stanley Cup final go to overtime. Game 4 and game 5 are overtime games. And he makes overtime feel exactly the way it should in the playoffs, where everything's on the line and it's all at stake. And that's what he gives you. And like, to be this well-versed and educated guy as he was, that's where the nickname came from. That's how we know of Doc, you know.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
You know, he was this guy who had a PhD in communications, and that was where it came from. Like, everybody started calling him Doc, and it stuck. And to go from all the various networks to be, you know, I mentioned this before. I mentioned this in the chat we were talking about with friends. I talked about with friends of mine. I think we mentioned it in our chat. And then it came up on the station even too, like when ESPN had the rights to hockey, and he wasn't even the A team.
The good old days.
But he wasn't even the A team. The A team was Gary Thorne with Bill Clement. Wow. I mean, he was for a while. I mean, Doc was for a little while, because Doc was with Bill Clement on ESPN for a while. But it was Gary Thorne, and that was talked about for a while and stuff like that. And, you know, now you got to figure out who it's going to eventually. It's, you know, there's 2 names it's probably going to, if we're being honest. You know, it's either going to Kenny Albert or to John Forsland, and Forsland would be great, because Forsland, I think, has the background in the game a little longer. I mean, Kenny Albert's done radio. Fine. And a lot of people feel that way. Kenny Albert's done radio for the Rangers for the longest time, and I'm not going to let's this way. He's a nice guy, so I'm not going to sit there and say that like he's problematic. There's just people who don't always love his delivery. There's people who don't love his energy, because his energy can't match what some of the other guys do. There's people who associate him too much with different sports. You know, you associate him too much with like you don't associate him with hockey. I mean, let's put it this way. I even heard that because NBC gave Mike Tirico games, and it's like, I'm not saying Mike Tirico is not a great broadcaster. I love him as a broadcaster. I just don't associate him with hockey. I associate him with football.
I'd like to see Tirico do some hockey. I'm curious to see how.
I'd like to see him join the team. I just don't know that I can say he's the number 1 guy, because I just don't associate him with hockey yet.
Yeah, and you know how it works. There will be a name that emerges, and it probably won't be for a couple of years, but somebody will kind of step forward as the standout guy, and we'll know who the next one is.
Well, and let's be real, that the NBC or whoever has the rights will still tap into the Canadian market for this. So Chris Cuthbert's still going to do games, and Gord Miller's still going to do games. Again, I like Gord Miller. As a matter of fact, I think that among the Canadian teams, Gord Miller's team with Ray Ferraro is one of the best out there. I love when Ray Ferraro is analyzing the game, because he's so good at it. I watch TSN videos on Facebook for that reason alone, because usually Ray Ferraro calls into those shows, and I love his insight that much. That's how much I value his own insight. But that's what I'm saying. Like, but this was, and I wrote something, like I wrote this big long thank you kind of thing to Doc and things like that, which was, just my way of saying that this is who we waited for. People would imitate him. I have clips from the past of me imitating him, not like clips on like anything else, but like people who would take a video. Like I was doing this in college. Like late in college, we're sitting around the TV. We turn the volume. 100%
believe
this. No, we turn the volume down on NHL playing the game. Like we're playing EA Sports NHL, and you turn the volume down, and I start doing. And I remember a moment when it stuck, or like it kind of stuck, because I did the hit the post with the shot thing, and I did that or something like that. I said something that was very on brand for Doc, without thinking about it. And my two friends are rolling laughing because it's so hit like the right way that they were laughing hysterically. And from that point on, we started doing. They had found there used
Doc
to be,
has
and I
his
think
catchphrases,
but there used to be a Twitter account. Okay, Doc's not on Twitter.
Right.
There used to be a Twitter account that was called like Doc in Real Life or something like that.
Okay.
Or real Doc Emrick tweets, I think is what it was.
Okay.
Or something like that. And it was obviously it's not the real Doc Emrick, but it would take situations and then tweet them as if he was watching them. So we had one that was like, and I'm not going to try to do the voice because it's really early and my voice can't handle it after all this. But it said something like, because this is the clip they have. It's, I wake up after a long St. Patrick's Day. My head is pounding. I run into the, I shimmy over to the bathroom or something like that. I work my way to the bathroom and survey my options. No Excedrin. What chaos. And it was all that type of, and now picture that in a Doc voice. And you would literally read these in Doc's voice. And we would have a ball with these.
That's
and actually
really
at one point
funny.
in time, one of my buddies actually tag teamed with me on it. And I would read the part in Doc's voice. And I read one of them and I cut it short and then turned around and went, let's go inside the glass to Pierre. And he just comes up and he goes, Doc, the only direction I know is going straight to the net. And we started laughing hysterically. It was because
we're going to have to get you to revive this for the You Would Think talent show.
Then I need all my partners with me or something like that. Like I need the whole deal here. But like it was really funny stuff, and it's big. But that's the whole point. Like he's a guy who a lot of people would love to imitate, but there's never going to be
never duplicated,
and there's never going to be another like him because. And what the reason there's never going to be another one like him is for real. Like at this point, honestly, is this really is the ambassador for the game to me. Like this man
loves hockey.
This is the U.S. ambassador for hockey and broadcasting. Yep. Like Canada's got a few. Canada had Bob Cole, definitely had and has their share of others too. Jim Hewson, I think Gord Miller and Chris
Don
Cuthbert
Cherry, like him really.
Don Cherry is Don Cherry was different because John Cherry wasn't completely a broadcaster.
No, I know.
He obviously has history. I'm talking about guys who strictly were broadcasters.
He has a broadcast history legacy.
Yes, but I'm talking about guys who strictly were broadcasters who carried the torch for the game and said, like, this is my home. This is my thing, and I'm carrying the torch for it because I'm telling you how great this game is. And that was Doc for U.S. hockey.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying he's the only guy in the U.S. who's associated with the game because obviously, we've talked about Dave Strader on this show. We've talked about, we mentioned Gary Thorne just recently, and as a guy who we all grew up with, because he was the guy on ESPN in the early 2000s. But he was that guy in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. It was Gary Thorne who was calling the Stanley Cup final.
You know who's that guy now? It's been Doc for several years.
Well, yeah, it's been Doc, and Doc's called the last 14 Stanley Cups. And here's the thing, too, I'll say about him retiring that made it kind of shocking and a little bit sad, too. There's almost this element with guys like Doc, and in Philadelphia specifically, we've been spoiled. We've been spoiled with some really great broadcasters, and whether it's the local, like let's say, whether you want to go all the way back to the beginning and sit there and say, for the Flyers, it's been Gene Hart for the longest time.
The Flyers have only really had two broadcasters on TV.
I'll say three because I will give Doc a little nod here in that and saying he had his time. But yes, other than that, they've had two other broadcasters.
It's Gene and Jim.
It's been Gene Hart and Jim Jackson, and we're both and either would whatever end of the spectrum you fall on, no pun intended with the spectrum there.
Spectrum.
The way,
I see what you did.
Whatever.
Is it almost like a prism? Is it?
Yeah. But whatever end of the spectrum you fall on, whether you were watching from when Gene Hart was doing it or whether you were born into the Jim Jackson era, kind of like I was, because
Hello.
I basically remember just Jim Jackson. I know that Doc was still doing games in that time, but
My first memories of Gene Hart are as the Phantoms announcer.
yeah, sure.
The Phantoms broadcaster. Yep.
But nonetheless, like whether you were born into the Gene Hart time or the Jim Jackson time, whether for the Sixers, you know, if everybody knows Mark Zumoff now, and I think both Jim Jackson and Mark Zumoff have been doing Flyers and Sixers games respectively for the last quarter century.
A long time.
Like they're both at the 25-year mark, I believe.
At least, for sure.
And then obviously in football, Merrill Reese is a treasure.
If you don't know who Merrill Reese is, you shouldn't be listening to this podcast. And we're not even an Eagles podcast.
Yeah, I know, and still going strong. And then obviously, and this is where I was really trying to take it. You take it to a level of Harry Kalas, which is a legendary broadcaster who you almost assume is just going to do this until the end.
Yeah.
That one day he's just not going to wake up. It's going to, you know, we're going to be saddened that his life is over, but we're going to know he literally lived the last days of his life just doing whatever he loved to do. And we almost take that for granted. Like Vin Scully retired years ago from doing Dodger games. He was a national voice, obviously, too. And you almost assume, like, how is there supposed to be a way? Like, how do you have Dodger baseball without Vin Scully while he's still alive?
Right. He could be here. Why isn't he?
Like you almost assume how is that guy still living, but he's not able to, like, he's not going to call the games.
He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing.
And you respect the decision, obviously. Like, you know why they're doing it. They want to enjoy the last years of their life. I mean, Vin Scully's 90 years old.
Yeah, he's still alive. And he's been retired for a while at this
point. Still
alive,
still kicking, and has a Twitter account.
I know.
I want to see Doc make a social media account.
Doc
just
better
to tell stories.
Better get a Twitter account.
Like, make something on social media just tell stories.
I want Doc to go on Spit and Chicklets for 12 hours and just tell stories, because you know he's got them.
Do you know the funny thing, though, is if you got Doc onto something like that,
he would open up.
I'm not saying he wouldn't open up, but he would do it in the cleanest way possible for a podcast that doesn't keep it clean.
I know.
That's the funny part.
Whatever podcast gets the Doc, you know, the tear it all open interview, man, we'll do it. Hey Doc, come on the show. we'll leave the call on as long as you want. Tell as many stories as you want.
But that's the way it feels, right? Like it feels like here's a guy who's just riding off into the sunset, calls his last game, and that's the end of it, and he's not going to come back.
Yep.
And yet you wonder how it's supposed to carry on while he's still around. Like you just kind of take for granted that they're just going to do it forever.
Hockey season starts and they interview Doc and say, "Hey Doc, what's it like not calling games?" But then you also see Doc not calling.
Doc is going into what I guess you could call, I don't even want to call it semi-retirement, because he's not going to come back and call a game, but he's going to make these videos again, you know, like how he narrated the end of the Stanley Cup. And he narrated one for himself, which even was worse, because and I say worse, like in the sense that like it was great. It was outstanding as it always is, but it was worse because it just tugged at your heartstrings even more than the first one did.
Absolutely.
Just talking about the game, how it actually, they pulled it off. They awarded the Stanley Cup. Now he's talking about his own career and how he knows it's time. And you're sitting there watching this and you're going, oh my God, like stop it. It's Monday morning. It's Monday morning at 11 o'clock. I'm not ready to do this.
Not ready to sob it at my home office.
Right. I mean, there was a difference because I remember watching the other one. Watching the one after the Stanley Cup final, which was ready to go like 20 minutes after, you know, all they had to do was throw some footage in and talk about it and stuff. But nonetheless, like you watch it and you're like, it choked you up almost, because it was like, look at what they did. Look at what they did in the last 2 months that made this work.
They did the darn thing.
He's right. Like when we get to do it again with people around and stuff like that, it's going to be better than before. And we're going to remember how much we love this game and all stuff. And you're like, but that's what Doc was. That's how Doc would talk about the game. He loved it as much, you know, if you couldn't come away from watching a game he called and appreciate it more. And I know I did. Like, that's why I even said, I know I appreciate the game that much more. And he's right. Like his whole thing was, the thing with the job was they call it a job and you get to go to the game for free and you get a good seat and you get to talk to players and coaches and management and be around all these people who you didn't expect to be around. And then, oh, by the way, they mail you a check every 2 weeks. What's better than that? And he's right. I mean,
good life.
And for some of us, because I even said 6 years of doing this, I totally get it. I get to talk to people I didn't think I'd ever talk to in my life. I get to watch the games for free. I get a good seat to the game, right? And I don't even really get paid to do it. And I don't care because I like the other parts of it. You're right. Like it makes you love it that much more because you just there's a level of involvement that you have a small part in it somewhere because you either asked that guy a question, you talked, had this conversation, you got to be at that event and write about it or have a podcast about it or something, right? Like we get to do this, and he's right. Like he totally knows how to encapsulate that. And it's, I very much, I'm sure you took a look at it, Kyle, and I very much wrote it with Doc's voice in my head, trying to like have the little voice tell you where to go with this to make it as eloquent as possible, because that's him. He knows
it was
how
a very
to
Doc article.
He knows how to rattle off the right words at the right time so that you're almost getting a soliloquy in front of you.
Certain people, anybody can watch chaos and call chaos. Doc was really good at turning chaos into poetry.
Well, and he was, and not only that, but I think you're wrong. I don't think anybody can just call chaos.
Well, sure.
Because every sport, and I've thought this for a little while, and in thinking this too, every sport has a way of doing this, right? You have, basketball, you have a little bit of time to kind of map out what's going to happen, and then you call the play, and there's and you kind of see it unfold in front of you. A shot goes up, you may have, especially if it's like a 3-pointer, you have some time to kind of sit on that, hang on that shot, and then prepare yourself.
And it bounces off the rim 3 times and goes in, sending the Sixers home in Game 7.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying, but you have a little bit, but you do have a little bit of time to hang. Well, and let's put it this way, instead of saying sends the Sixers home, which I know.
I just sent a dagger through Dom's heart.
I know, but I know Dom. Look, I watched that game, and I as someone who didn't get to call sports like hockey and football in college, we didn't have, like, my school didn't have, it didn't get a baseball program. Didn't get a baseball program until after I graduated.
Perfect.
Never had a football program, never had a hockey program, and had basketball. So basketball was the thing, and that's what I called the most of. Having been there and done that, I just, like, I'm sitting there going, you see some pretty crazy stuff in basketball games. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And man alive, if something like that happens and it ends your season, it is crushing. I know how it, like, believe me, there's nothing you can do other than shake your head and go, I can't believe it happened that way. But that's all you can do, because you pretty much did everything right. It just bounced the wrong way. And what can you do about that? But the person who's calling that game has to think about it from the winner's angle, and it's the superstar player for the winning team. So while that shot's up there, you're hanging on that result. You have a little bit of time to kind of think of who took it, who's going to win, who's going to lose,
There's a lot that hangs in that moment.
Football is the same way. Football, they line up, you have a moment to parse it. And baseball is really a lot about being the storyteller in between the moments when you actually have action. You have to be able to make a good call in the moment of some craziness, but you also have to be able to,
generally speaking, baseball is a lot of setup.
You have to be able to set it up, but you also have to be able to let it breathe when it's the 5th inning of a game and go, there's nothing exciting about this situation per se. It could be an exciting situation.
Somebody's up 6-0.
But or no, even if it's a close game, and it could be, but you don't know, like, nobody's on, or there's a runner on first. You don't anticipate it being the
baseball goes 0 to 100 very quickly.
It can, but it coasts along at 5 for a lot of it. And you need to know how to call it in that way. Hockey is nothing more than literally unscripted chaos on the ice. I mean, it literally is. And that's what I kind of tried to describe in the article, was it's chaos. It's literally trying, like, you have to rattle off words at the rate of an auctioneer to try to keep up with what's happening in front of you. And I even mentioned in the article about how on the station, one of the things they talk about is, can you talk hockey on sports talk radio? Because there's not a lot of second guessing going on. Within a game, like,
there's not a lot of analysis. Things happen so quickly in the moment.
There is a lot of analysis to breaking down the play, but there is not
while
the
it's
day after.
happening.
But there is not a lot the day after. And the other thing, the way I compared it was, as I said in the article, was a lot of us sit there and say, you know what, if we've ever played in a softball league, or we ever played touch football or something like that, we sit there and we go, well, come on, I could have made that catch. I could have made that play.
Right.
I at least would have known where to go, like something. If any of us were thrown into the situation that a hockey player is and said, you play that 2-on-1,
right?
Or you go ahead and stop the 100-mile-an-hour slap shot from the blue line.
It's just such a different universe.
Right. It's so different, and it's so physically demanding, and it happens so quickly that you go ahead and try to make a decision in that moment of how you're going to cover a guy, how you're going to try to break up a play, how you're going to try to prevent a pass from getting to that guy. And most of us would fail miserably and say, okay, never mind. Right. Or never even take the opportunity. And here's a guy who knew that, because here's a guy who went to school for communications, who didn't have any athletic ability probably to do it, but knew he was going to appreciate it more because they could. Right. And I get to sit here I get to sit here and just watch it and broadcast it and tell people how amazing it is that they're able to do what they do, because it's not easy to do it. And oh, by the way, in addition to taking that great shot that goes bar down, or making that saucer pass across the ice to the guy who's open, or blocking that shot, or making a save and goal,
just clearing it on the penalty kill, just getting it over the blue line on the penalty kill.
Oh, by the way, in addition to doing those skills, you're doing it on two blades on ice
that are 3/8 of a millimeter,
3/16 of an inch,
3/16 of an inch. Okay. Yeah. So good luck with that. And
it's a challenging sport. It's challenging to get out there and skate. I can't do it. I'm thrilled that I know how to skate, let alone that I can, and let's say at the end of the day, what can I do from an athletic ability with this? I can go out there and yes, I can skate by myself, and yes, I can shoot. Like I can take a shot and put it off of a spot.
I can hold the wall and wobble.
But there you go. I can do those things by myself standing in a driveway. I can't go and do them in a game.
No,
definitely nowhere near at that level. Obviously. I mean, I couldn't even do it in grade school.
Right. Can't even do it to producer Mike's level where he played in high school and sucked.
I was gonna say, I mean, it's at the station. We got the one guy who did it in June, almost did it at a college junior level.
Okay.
And that's as far as he got. And it's impressive, because at that point in time, guess what? You know what you are doing at that level? You are playing against with or against, because of the state you're in, because he was in New Jersey. Okay. You are playing with or against Johnny Gaudreau.
Right.
At the same age, and going, here's a guy who's as talented as I've ever seen. And even then, I wouldn't know what to do if I was in those shoes. Like at that stage, he's not even an established player yet.
Well, right.
So, but that's what Doc was so able to capture for everybody, is how difficult it is, but yet how majestic it is. And the game's going to miss him tremendously. I mean, I know I am. I'm sure you are. You guys, we all were texting about it as soon as it came out, and we were all on top of it. And we're like, it feels like a huge loss. Like it feels like it's just, and he's not gone, he's retiring, but it feels just like a huge loss for the game, because it's something we loved. You got up for Doc games. That's what it was. You got up for Doc games.
Yeah. And like you said, he took this beautiful game that we both love so much, that's so complex and there's so much going on. And he just absolutely was, in a lot of ways, the soundtrack of my hockey growing up, right? Big games, important games, playoff games.
And a big part of it, I'd say that, like obviously we have affinity to the local guys.
Well, yeah, it's Jim Jackson first and foremost. Right. But I'm talking big moments, playoff games, like you said, the Olympics, 16, 17 Stanley Cups, like the man's done it all.
Yeah. And when it was national, whenever a game was on national, and believe me, as and as our listeners and viewers know, the Flyers get on national TV an awful lot. So you get a healthy dose of the national guys, and you just, those were the ones you looked forward to. And I actually found it ironic. One of the things I went back and looked at really quick was he called 3 games for the Flyers this year.
Okay.
And they were all wins for the Flyers. Because he called the unofficial home opener, if you will, the home opener in Philly. No, the Philly.
Right. The Carter Hart game.
Yes. So he called Carter Hart's first shutout against the Devils.
Yeah.
He had a game in January against Washington, which Kevin Hayes scored a shorthanded goal in the second period.
I remember that one. That was a good game.
By the way, it's a great call by him. And he called Jake Voracek's overtime winner against St. Louis.
Wow. That's pretty good.
That, I believe, was the last one. And I don't know if there was more to come. I mean, I think they had a Sunday afternoon game that was supposed to be Flyers Penguins.
Yeah, that would have been
Doc. Could have been him. Well, it's tough to say. You never know how they do these assignments, but that could have been him. And I'm sure that if the playoffs would have allowed for more travel, if everything was normal, obviously, that he might have done more of those games. Obviously, he would have done those games if he was on. If the Flyers had made the conference finals, he probably would have done those games against Tampa.
Right. Once you get into the national bubble, I'm sure they would have gotten a lot of Doc.
Right. And
either way,
but that's where we were. And it's,
we we definitely send Doc our best wishes as a family here over at You Would Think. And like I said, you're welcome to come on the show anytime you'd like, Doc.
I don't know where Doc's going to be finding his stuff because I don't know of him to have a social media presence, but
definitely one of the best to ever do it. And tell us your best memory of Doc on Twitter. We're over there at YWT Podcast. What's your favorite Doc call of all time? Send it over to us.
I know one that's not getting nominated because as much as he was a great Stanley Cup final broadcaster, I can tell you one that's not getting nominated. And it might be something else from that same year might be the winner for our listeners.
Okay. But either way,
there's one that stands out, obviously.
Right. Well, why don't you send that over to us from at Kevin_Durso, where you could be found. You can also be found at Flyerdelphia, at Sports Talk PHL. You can find the show everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts. You can also find us every single week at sportstalkphilly.com. It's all on the board behind Kevin, which you can see on our YouTube page. Don't forget to head over there and subscribe to us over there. We're gonna try to do some more stuff on our YouTube page kind of moving forward. So some subscribers over there would be super helpful. And in the meantime, that'll do it for us. We are off for another 2 weeks. We will be back 2 weeks from today, about Sunday night at 8 o'clock as usual. And until then, we'll see you guys later.